Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome to our 9th core lesson. This one is particularly special because it has to do with something that happens to all of us at one point or another in our lives, and that is failure. Yes, we all fail, and when we do, what you want to do is embrace that failure and learn from that experience. Now, let's start as usual with our quote of the day, and it goes like this. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, and that is the fear of failure, which we all have at one point or another. But we need to get over that particular fear. Today, we're going to start with the introduction and mystery question. Then we'll go on to what is failure and why is failure actually good for you. Then we'll go into an activity called the failure toss. And this particular activity I find really interesting, and I hope you do too. Then we'll take a look at how to learn specifically from failure, the steps that you should take in order to gain the most from these experiences. And finally, of course, we'll wrap up with the mystery question answered. So let's get into that mystery question. And the question is, who is this famous American politician? Let me describe who he is. Number one, this particular person failed in business. He also failed in farming. He also lost running for state legislature at one point in time. He also then had a nervous breakdown and was rejected for a job as land officer. Now, that's not just it. In addition, he ran for Congress and, can you guess, failed. He ran for U.S. Senate and then failed. He ran for Vice President of the United States and, can you guess, failed. And finally, he ran for Senate again and, what do you think? He won? Lost? He failed. Who could this person be? That's the mystery question for this particular core lesson. And as we go throughout learning about failure, how to embrace failure, and how to learn from failure, can you guess who this particular American politician is or was? So to recap fairly quickly, because this was a short introduction and mystery question, we looked at the details of a famous American politician, specifically his failures, and then the question was, who is this person? All right, again, try to guess and get ready as we get into the next section. What is failure and why is it good for you? Okay. So what is failure and why is it good for you? Well, let's take a look. But first, as you might have guessed, go ahead and get out some paper and a pen. We're just going to do a little bit of writing, just a few notes. So once you get out that piece of paper, let's begin. I'll hit pause real quickly. Okay, let's continue. What is failure? I'm actually asking you, what is your definition of failure? Now, hold on a minute. Don't look in the dictionary. I want you to think of your own personal definition as best you can. It can be what you remember from the dictionary or what you learned in life or you heard from your parents, or it can be your own personal definition. What is failure to you? Go ahead, push pause, and write down 1 or 2 sentences defining failure as it applies to you. How about this question? Have you ever failed? Sure, it's an obvious answer. Everybody fails, right? Well, I'd like you to think of a time that you failed. Now, the bigger, the better. If you have failed big, fantastic. So take a moment. Think of some point in your life where you really tried, you did your best, but you failed. Okay, can you think of something? Again, write down that experience in a couple words. A sentence, 2, 3 sentences. It doesn't matter. Just briefly describe that experience of you failing. Okay, I have it. Are you ready? Failure is unavoidable and necessary. Not what you were expecting from me, right? This isn't really a definition of failure, but This is the truth about failure. And this is what I really want you to understand and embrace throughout the rest of this lesson. Number one, you can't avoid failing. Number two, it's necessary. It's for your own benefit. So are any of you Batman fans by chance? I'm not necessarily a fan, but I have seen the movies. And in one of the movies, I don't remember which one, Bruce Wayne, or Batman as a child, happened to fall down, and his father had a lesson for him. And he said, "Son, why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up." That's brilliant to me. Failure is the foundation that learning is based upon. Think about how many times you had to fall in order to ride a bike, how many mistakes you needed to make in order to learn a new skill. How about to become a master at that skill? Imagine how many times you need to fail then. You shouldn't think negatively about failure because it's unavoidable, it's necessary, and it has several benefits that you should keep in mind. And what are those benefits? Well, let's look at 8 of them. Here's 8 reasons why failure is good. Number 1, embrace failure because, as I already said, everyone fails. Beware of social media, ladies and gentlemen. People post only the highlights of their lives and enhance the images and stories to make them look even better than they are. Your Facebook feed can make you feel like a lesser of a person because you might not feel like you have the life you should. But SNS isn't reality, right? Everybody struggles and fails. These failures are reality checks and teach us a little humility. Without failure, we might not reflect on our lives and appreciate what we have. And we'll see later, appreciation is a key to happiness. Number 2, failure makes you dig deeper and reach new understandings. Without failure, we might not reflect on our lives and appreciate what we have. Failure helps us reflect on the journey of life and what we want and where we're going. This reflection opens up new solutions to the problems we face. New opportunities arise. Number 3, failure emboldens the mind, making you stronger. Frederick Douglass once said that without struggle, there can be no progress. And how true is that? Every person who is truly successful in which it was not given to them by family or handed to them in some way has gone through some degree of difficulties. It's these difficulties that make people stronger and push them to realize their goals. Number 4, through failure, you learn life lessons that can't be learned from success. If you were always successful and never failed, what would you really learn? This idea is, of course, related to other reasons on the list, but it's something to remember when you're faced with failure in the future. You'll find yourself possibly deciding to continue or to give up. What will be your choice and why? Number 5, failure makes you search for new ways of doing things. Thomas Edison is famous for failing over 10,000 times to invent a commercially viable electric light bulb, but he never gave up. He viewed each failed attempt as a learning experience. Finally, after persistence, he invented a stable, working light bulb that changed human progress everywhere. Quite often, we need to work hard and continue to struggle before we solve the puzzles we're working on. Number 6, failure makes you more empathetic to the plight of others. Failure helps you better understand others' unfortunate situations. If you've experienced a similar struggle as someone else, then you can empathize with them much more. And better understanding people and the situations in the world leads to better connections with others and a better sense of morality and ethics. And we need these things to build better futures for ourselves, our children, and those around us. Number 7, knowing that it's okay to fail allows you to take more risks in life. Remember at the beginning of this lesson, we saw a quote, "There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, the fear of failure." Well, fear, at least irrational fear, is your biggest enemy in so many things in life. The fear of public speaking, the fear of talking to that girl or boy you like, fear of asking questions, fear of trying something new, fear of being successful. It's a much bigger risk to not try than to try. And now that you know that failure is a teaching tool, you may become more ready to take on bigger yet smarter risks that lead to successes. And finally, success tastes far sweeter after major failures. You may have heard a saying similar to, "How can you appreciate the good without first knowing the bad?" Or, "You can't appreciate the light without the dark." If you rarely fail and only have small failures, then you will not really enjoy your successes. However, the opposite is true. Once you've struggled, failed, and then succeeded, that moment will be like no other. It will feel fantastic, and it will motivate you to continue developing yourself more into who you want to be. Therefore, to wrap things up on what is failure and why is it good for you, well, we looked at how to define failure. I asked you to define failure for yourself. Then I told you the simple truth about failure, that it is unavoidable and necessary. And finally, we looked at the 8 reasons that failure is good. So having said that, let's get ready for an interesting activity called the failure toss in the next lesson coming up. Now let's get ready for our activity titled the failure toss. And this is a pretty interesting activity that's going to help you reflect on the failures that you've made and the wisdom you've taken from these failures. So let's get going. But before we begin, I'd like you to get out not 1, but 2 of your worksheets for today's lesson. The first one is titled the failure toss activity. And the second one is titled your failure toss reflection worksheet. Please get those 2 out before we begin. Go ahead and push pause and come back after you have those 2 sheets ready. Look again at your definition of failure that I asked you to define in our previous lesson. And if you look up here, I've got a few examples of failure that maybe are definitions from other people. Let's read those real quickly. Number 1 up here, failure is when we don't match up to the expectations we have of ourselves. Okay, that's a good definition. Do you agree or disagree? The next one here is failure is when we can't meet the goals we set for ourselves. All right, that's a decent definition of failure. Maybe both of these are true in their own ways. How about the third one? I don't think there's a thing like failure because we always learn from our mistakes. You know, that's a really positive attitude on failure itself. Do you agree or disagree with that definition? Whatever your definition is, I'm curious, what are your particular failures? So let's get out your first worksheet titled Failure Toss Activity Worksheet. Now, if for some reason you don't have this is also doable on a piece of paper, but it's better if you have the one I've provided. And don't forget your pencil or pen. Once you've got that worksheet ready, go ahead and divide the worksheet down the center. Fold it vertically in half, creating 2 columns, as you can see in the image on your screen. Now you can see on the top left, we have a column called failures. And in the top right, we have a column called wisdoms. Now, I'd like you to list your failures in the left-hand column. For example, failure 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead, push pause, and fill out this left-hand column. Okay, now that we're back, I'd like you to reflect on each failure and what wisdom, what lesson do you feel that you've taken from each failure? I'd like you to list those wisdoms on the right-hand side that correspond with each failure. Take a moment here, push pause, and complete the right-hand column. Now that you've completed both columns, I'd like you to do this. That line going down the center, I'd like you just to rip it in half. Now, carefully, of course, so it's a clean cut, but separate both of these sides. Separate this paper into 2 halves. Okay, take a moment, push pause, do it quickly. From there, you have 4 choices I'd like you to make. Think carefully about these 4. Number 1, thinking about your failures and your wisdoms. Would you like to, number 1, keep both your failures and your wisdoms? Number 2, throw away your failures and keep your wisdoms? Number 3, throw away your wisdoms and keep your failures? Or number 4, throw away both your failures and your wisdoms? What would be your personal choice? We're going to push pause one more time so you can give it some thought. Okay, now, if you chose to throw away something, ball it up and throw it away in the trash. Just get rid of it. Go for it. Do it right now. Throw it away. All right. I'd like you to look at your failure toss reflection worksheet and answer these 3 questions. Number 1, what choice did you make? Go ahead and write it down in the space provided under number 1. That's an easy answer, right? You just made it. Number 2, why? Now here's a little bit more difficult question. Why did you make that decision? Write it down in the space provided in number 2 and explain as best you can why you made that decision. And then number 3, what is the life lesson in this experience? Now, this is what you feel you've gotten from this exercise, philosophical or not. What do you feel is the potential life lesson that this exercise could provide you as an individual, you specifically? And that is the failure toss exercise. You might see the value in it at the moment, or you might not. And if you don't, you might see the value in it in the near future. We'll see. So wrapping up the failure toss, I asked you to get out your 2 worksheets, your failure toss worksheet and your reflection worksheet. And you made a choice, one of these 4 choices of what to do with your failures and your wisdoms. And then you filled out your reflection worksheet. And we might come back to this at some point in the future. Having said that, let's get ready for the next lesson, how to learn from failure. Now you know how to embrace failure, but how do we learn from failure? Well, what you need to do is put in the effort to do so. Before we begin on the steps on learning from failure, what I want you to do is keep in the back of your head, keep in mind the failures that you've made, maybe specifically the bigger failures that you've made, and think about these as we go throughout these next few steps. To learn from failure, you want to do 5 things in this order. Number 1, take responsibility. 2, identify the cause. 3, evaluate your thinking. 4, research it. And 5, document it. Let's go throughout each of these in a little bit more detail. Number 1, take responsibility. Recognize that you failed. That's not difficult. However, whose fault was it? Don't complain. Don't blame others or situations that are out of your control. If you mentally take responsibility and you own that failure, then you'll become mentally stronger and better prepared to prevent failure, or better prepared for the next time failure happens. Here are some quotes that you might like. I sure do. From the famous Jim Rohn, he said, "You must take responsibility. You cannot change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind, but you can change yourself." Lou Holtz, quote unquote, "The man who complains about the way the ball bounces is likely to be the one who dropped it." And number 3, George Washington Carver. 99% of all failures come from people who have a habit of making excuses. Don't make excuses. Don't complain. Own your failure. Number 2, identify the cause. Quite often, the cause of failure is not one particular situation, action, or decision. It's usually a combination of decisions that were made over time. Look back on what decisions you made and which ones have contributed to the final result of failure. And document. Write it down. Document every decision, working backwards until you reach the point that ultimately became the road to failure. Number 3, evaluate your thinking. Try to recall, number one, how you imagined how things would turn out, and two, how things actually turned out. What was your vision of success and what was reality? Ask these questions. Were my goals reasonable and attainable? Did I make a mistake in setting my goals? Did I make accurate assumptions about my capabilities and the challenges? Did I make a mistake in judging the situation? Did my strategies make sense, given the circumstances and goals? Did I make a mistake in charting my course and choosing my methods? How logically organized, feasible, and complete was my plan? Did I make a mistake in creating the plan? And did my team, colleagues, friends, or just myself, did I follow the plan? Did I make a mistake in execution? All of these are really important questions to ask and to answer. Fourth, research it. Research how similar situations were dealt with by others. This will help you see what obstacles they faced and how they tried to overcome them. What can you learn from others' situations? Take notes on what you learn. Remember, there's a wealth of knowledge out there in books and online. You can learn from the best of the best, from the successful people in the world, from their mistakes and their successes. Put in the effort to find out those answers. Once you've looked at how others have dealt with similar situations, ask people you know what they think. Approach experts if possible. If not, talk to people who you might think have good advice. Have a conversation with them and explain the situation, ask questions, and write down their feedback. And finally, perhaps the most important part, once you know the cause of that failure, what led up to that failure, the decisions that were made, how others have approached similar problems, and you have some advice from others, then put it all on paper in a logical and organized format. This can be a great resource for you later, so do it. It may seem like a lot to do or possibly unnecessary, but remember, successful people do what unsuccessful people are not willing to do. So be willing to do what is necessary. There you have it. These are 5 steps to the road to understanding failure, embracing failure, and then learning from it. Take this advice and remember these 5 steps are: 1, take responsibility. 2, identify the cause. 3, evaluate your thinking. 4, research it. And 5, document it. That's it for this section on learning from failure. Let's get ready to answer the mystery question for embracing failure and learning from it. Now it's time to wrap up our core lesson on embracing failure and learning from it with the answer to our mystery question. Do you remember the question I asked you? Well, let's do a quick review. I asked you a question about a man who failed in business, farming, lost running for state legislature, had a nervous breakdown, got rejected for a job as land officer, ran for Congress and lost, ran for U.S. Senate and lost, ran for vice president of the U.S. and lost, and then ran again for Senate and lost. Who could this famous American politician be? Well, let me give you one more clue that might let you guess. Finally, he succeeded. He was elected President of the United States, but shortly after that, the nation split in 2. Well, can you guess now? The answer is none other than the 16th President, Abraham Lincoln. Despite all his failures and setbacks, Lincoln never gave up. He learned from his mistakes and persisted. It was the sum of all these experiences that made him stronger and the type of person who would become what is believed to be one of the best leaders the world has ever seen. So keep in mind and try to remember that behind every successful person is a number of failures. Let the story of Abraham Lincoln be inspiration to you the next time you fail. And remember this quote, straight from Lincoln himself: "You cannot fail unless you quit." And as always, remember to become a teacher. Take what you've learned in this lesson and spread the good news. If you know someone who's down because they've failed, teach them the 8 reasons why failure is good. If you know someone who has failed, help them understand how to learn from those failures, to take responsibility, identify the cause, evaluate their thinking, research, and then document. Overall, as you become the teacher, not only do you help others, you gain a deeper knowledge, a deeper insight into those lessons. So, as I said, that wraps it up for this particular core lesson on embracing failure and learning from it. Let's get ready for the next lesson, happiness and the science behind it.